Washington State University. Go Cougs!
Today I am going to be talking with you guys about research methods, and hopefully there'll be some information in here that you can take and apply to your own projects, or maybe some things that you hadn't really thought about. How many people have had some sort of class on research methods or have some information about research methods? Not many of you. Okay. Well, then this is going to be very important information for you. Because one of the first questions is, what is good research? So how do you know that what you're reading is good research? Can you guys tell me? What do you think good research is?
It's consistent, so you're getting the same findings each time when you apply it.
Okay, so the answer to the research question itself is consistent, like the same people are getting the same answer, okay?
It asks a specific testable question.
Okay, so it's going to ask a testable question and try and rule out kind of other confounding things that might explain the data, okay?
What's the objectives that you started out with?
Okay, so the question that you're looking at, the research method that you're using allows you to answer the question or the objective that you're interested in. Okay. All right, those are all really good suggestions. So really, one of the things that's going to be really important for you as you progress on as scientist is being able to take a look at an article and decide whether that article is methodologically sound. Because there's good research out there and there's poor research out there, and you need to be able to evaluate the quality of the research that you're using to back up any of the hypotheses that you're doing. The other thing about research is that really designing a research question and using your research methods, it's really a compromise. So a lot of people when they first start think, okay, I am going to design the perfect experiment. It's going to answer all the questions and I'm going to have the answer to, this really important question. But really it's a process. So we usually take the best possible method that we can come up with for answering our question, and we try to avoid as many confounds or other interpretations of the data as we possibly can. Now, it may be, and those of you who are used to looking at the literature in, say, cognitive psychology or social psychology journals, typically you don't just see one experiment. You may see as many as 7 experiments. And basically what they're doing is they're starting out with a hypothesis, they find an answer, but there could be other possible explanations for what they're looking at. And so then they have to go to the second study that kind of pulls apart those explanations. And then if there's still explanations, they have to go to the third study to kind of get to the point where they can say, we think that this is the best explanation for the data. So again, you're really working in terms of compromising and trying to find the best methodology for the question that you're interested in. So today we're going to look at a couple of different questions. We're going to explore what approaches scientists use to measure behavior in aging research, because we're going to see that there are some differences between non-developmental and developmental research. So I want to expose you to some of the designs that are used in aging research. What are general designs for doing research? I actually didn't realize that I had to press the space bar each time, so I apologize, and I am going to have to press the space bar each time. And then what specific designs are unique to aging research? Oh, maybe I won't have to. Okay, so before we even start doing research, one of the things that's really important is that we understand that we have to conduct our research ethically. How many have heard of like the Zimbardo prison experiment or the Milgram experiment where they were shocking each other? Okay, so those types of experiments would not be, they wouldn't get through our IRBs today because we have to protect the participants who are in our research studies. So we have an institutional review board. All the studies that we are working on that we do have to get approved by the Institutional Review Board. And then when our participants come into the study and we say, here, would you like to participate in this study? We have to have them read and sign an informed consent. And it basically tells them, this is what our study is about, this is what we're asking you to do, these are the risks, these are the possible benefits, and then they can make a decision as to whether or not they want to participate in your study. So those are things that are really important before you even start your study to make sure that you're going to be doing. And when you're designing your study, you have to be careful to make sure you're designing something that is going to be ethical, that people are going to want to participate in, and that's not going to cause any harm to your participants. Okay, so when you decide, okay, this is what I'm going to, this is a question that I'm interested in, you're going to have to decide what measures you're going to use in your study. So let's say I'm interested in looking at how personality impacts a person's memory abilities. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is pick some measures that I'm going to use to assess personality and to assess cognition. And I need to make sure that those measures are reliable measures. And that means that I'm going to get consistent data from people over time. So a real easy example is, let's say we're looking at someone's weight. And we have a scale, and we have the person step on the scale, and it says, oh, they weigh 70 pounds. Then they get off, and they step back on it, and now it says they weigh 100 pounds. They get off, and they get back on it, and now they weigh 130 pounds. Okay, is that a reliable measure to be using? No, because especially if I want to do a pre-post or I want to compare them to other people, I don't know what my data means because the measure that I'm using to look at weight is not a reliable measure. Same thing with personality. One of the things that we have to make sure is that we have some sort of internal consistency in all those questions that we are asking that say these questions all together, they represent the concept or the construct of, let's say, conscientiousness. We also need to make sure that if we gave the person this personality questionnaire over time and we thought conscientiousness was a trait, that we should get pretty good test-retest, right? Like if I gave it to you today and then I gave it to you a week from now, I should get pretty similar responses from you. The other thing, and this comes into play in a lot of the work we actually do in the smart home, where we have people do different tasks and we have to code the behavioral observations, is that we need to make sure that if I code the behavioral observations and then say Lisa codes them, that we're getting reliable data, that we're both coding them in very similar ways. This also happens with the sensor-based data when we're trying to decide what activities people are engaged in and get some sort of ground truth. If, I don't know, Tim's looking at it and saying this person's grooming and this person's sleeping now, and then Declan looks at it and says, this person is working on their computer now, then we've got a real problem because we don't have reliable data that we can use. So having measures that are reliable in your research is really important. Now, just because a measure is reliable, that doesn't mean that it's still a good measure. You not only have to have a reliable measure, you have to have a valid measure. So let's go back to that weight example. Let's say that I stepped on the scale and the scale said 70 pounds. Now, I could step on it again and it could say 70 pounds. And I could step on it again, it could say 70 pounds. And I can say I have a reliable measure, but is it measuring what I want it to measure? Well, if I was 70 pounds, yes, but I'm not, right? So that's not a valid measure of weight. So if I use that to look at weight, it's not going to be a good measure. So when we are deciding on measures, we have to not only make sure they're reliable, but we also have to make sure they're valid. Now, there are a number of types of validity that we can look at, and I'm going to show you some in a questionnaire that we developed. One, we need to make sure that the content is representative of what we think it should be measuring. So we developed a measure of everyday functioning in instrumental activities of daily living questionnaire. First thing we had to do was work with experts to make sure that the questions that we were coming up with were good questions that would tell us something about how people are functioning in their everyday life. Then we have to make sure that the information is really assessing what we think it should be assessing. So that means that we have to show that it's related to other measures that we think are good measures of everyday functioning, and it's not related to measures that maybe measure, I don't know, gender or personality, because those we don't think should be related very highly to everyday functioning. And then we also want to know whether that measure actually can predict things. So, things like, do SATs really predict how well you're going to do in college? Or do GREs predict how well you're going to do in graduate school? So can my measure of activities of daily living predict who has mild cognitive impairment and who is a healthy older adult? So, when you're choosing measures for your studies, it's important to make sure that your measures have reliability and that they are valid measures. And oftentimes, like when you're writing a grant, you may have to justify that your measures are both reliable and valid, because if they're going to give you money to run the study, they want to make sure that the instruments that you have chosen to answer your questions are good instruments. So in developing this questionnaire, we had to do a lot of work. First, initially developing the questions, doing a lot of pilot testing with people to test out the questions. Then we had to run some factor analyses. We ran some Roche analyses to get rid of questions that didn't really fit on our continuum. We had to demonstrate within the factors that we found that they had good internal consistency reliability. We had to demonstrate that over test-retest of 4 months, that each of the different factors had good test-retest reliability. We had to show that we had convergent and discriminant validity, so convergent validity with other measures of activities of daily living, and discriminant validity with psychosocial and demographic measures that we wouldn't think would be very representative. And we also had to show the ability to distinguish between these different diagnostic groups so that we could tell who was healthy older versus MCI versus dementia. So when you're looking for measures, you're going to look for data that shows, yes, I've got a reliable measure, and yes, it's valid. It's looking at what I'm interested in looking at.